Martin Heidegger's Letter on Humanism is a late text by Heidegger, and it is very much different from Being in Time in its style. It's much more poetic. I don't think I've seen a book in philosophy, or, well, in this case a letter, or any text in philosophy, quite so poetic as the Letter on Humanism, except for the occasional time when philosophy literally is poetry, and off the top of my head, I can only think of one such occasion, and that is portions of the Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius. So this is a very different text in style. However, in content, I don't think it's much different from Being in Time. I can't discern a single difference. To be quite honest, there's rather a lot I can't understand in this text, but what I can understand seems to me very thoroughly consistent with Being in Time and the Introduction to Metaphysics, only very different in style, much more poetic. And you'll note that in the Introduction to Metaphysics, Heidegger says that poetry is as high as philosophy. Poetry and philosophy can both do things science cannot do, and they can access truths about reality that lower things like science can't access. Poetry and philosophy are these higher human endeavors that can seek truth in a higher way, in a better way, in a more lofty sphere than anything science can do. And I think he's following his own advice and making his philosophy almost poetry in an effort to understand the world better. Now, this text, the Letter on Humanism, can be read as a response to Sartre's claim that existentialism is a humanism. Now, in that text, Sartre had actually called Heidegger an existentialist, and this certainly seems to make sense. Existentialism is the thesis that existence precedes essence, and Heidegger is a humanist, and Heidegger does say that existence precedes essence. The beings of the world are there independently of us, but our asking question about the category beings as a whole has an effect on the nature of the world. And in Being in Time, the being of the world is out there, but it is shaped by us. We humans impart, in our knowing of the world, in our experience with the world, we impart a human quality to the world. And so he is saying that the existence of things comes first and then its essence comes after. And while he's focusing more on the world than on humans, he does seem very much to be an existentialist in the manner of Sartre. However, existentialism says existence precedes essence, and Heidegger says here in the Letter on Humanism that these are all metaphysical terms. Existence and essence are metaphysical terms, and Heidegger is not prepared to use metaphysical terms. What he's doing is giving us advice for how to do metaphysics. And I don't think even here in this late text he's actually done it himself. He's still in this preliminary stage of learning how to do metaphysics. We haven't actually done the metaphysics yet, and so we can't use these terms, existence and essence. So if you define these terms loosely, or if you don't quite define them yet, you can say Heidegger is an existentialist, but he resists the term if these terms are taken, if the terms existence and essence are taken as having a fixed metaphysical definition. Okay, now, with all that as preliminary, what is actually going on in this text? Well, he's concerned with the question, how do we restore meaning to the word humanism? It can be read as a response to Sartre's claim, but it can also be, but it is also important to understand that the direct occasion for the text is a letter written to Heidegger by someone else in which this question had been asked. How can we restore meaning to the word humanism? The situation here is one which parallels the situation MacIntyre's interested in After Virtue, or John Dewey is interested in The Quest for Certainty. Heidegger is concerned that with the loss of metaphysics, we lose our humanity, and we lose our values. In the old days, things seemed to be squared away nicely. We had metaphysics, and we had ethics. We had our values understood in light of metaphysical truth. This was very much the case in Platonism. Recall the School of Athens from Raphael. Here's Plato pointing to higher reality. And it is in light of that higher reality that we know how we ought to live. And with Christian medieval philosophy, it's very similar. We have a metaphysical account of reality, and God's at the top of that account, and this tells us how we ought to live when you work out all the ethical details. Well, in the modern era, all this metaphysics was cast aside, and characters like Kant tried to come up with new ways of grounding values, but they were possibly a philosophical failure, but certainly a cultural failure. And so when Nietzsche had said, God is dead, he means that the idea of God is no longer culturally relevant. And so it happens where the values of someone like Kant, all these values are no longer culturally relevant. And Heidegger is concerned with this situation that we seem to have lost our values with the old metaphysics. How can we restore meaning to the word humanism? How can we restore human values in the light of the demise of our old metaphysics? Now, one thing you could do is you could stick to the old values and try to come up with a metaphysics that makes them work. Or you could go back to the old metaphysics. If you went back to the old metaphysics, you'd be doing something dualistic in a typical sense of the term. You'd be positing, like Plato, some higher reality or something. And then you would say that our values are to be interpreted in light of the higher reality. And Heidegger resists this. He's not going back to the old metaphysics. Another thing you could do is you could just stick with your values and try to find a metaphysics that works for them, or try to make them work without metaphysics. Arguably, something like that is what Sartre is doing, or maybe Kant. Heidegger doesn't want to do this either. I think he's very much like the pre-moderns, in that I think a proper understanding of value will be determined by a proper understanding of reality. But we don't have the proper understanding of reality. Heidegger wants to do metaphysics first, I think. But as he's been saying all along, we must do it properly. And we must start with understanding the nature of being, with a capital B, by understanding the nature of beings, by understanding the nature of the world, with attention to things like the human aspect of the world, which is imparted to the world by us. And in between dualism and something else stands Heidegger. That something else is Scientism. Now there's this old dualistic way of saying there's the higher reality, there's the world, and the higher reality makes sense of the world and gives us our values for living in the world. And then there's the way of Scientism. I won't say science, but the way of Scientism, which says the whole world, all of reality, can be quantified and measured and studied scientifically. And furthermore, we can be the masters and possessors of nature, as Descartes said, and as Bacon said in his text, Founding Modern Science. We can fix up the world the way we like it. We can remake the world the way we want it to be. We can be the lords and possessors and masters of nature. We can control it with our technology. There's that perspective. And Heidegger is between that and dualism. And he wants us to first do metaphysics and then figure out the values. But as we're doing the metaphysics, the values the values will just naturally disclose themselves, I think. Because in between the reduction of all reality, the materialistic reduction of all reality to what can be measured and quantified, and in between the dualism that says this world has no meaning apart from the higher world, in between those two things is the Heideggerian way of studying the world with attention to the human aspect of reality and finding in it not only values, but finding in it metaphysical truth about metaphysics, finding in it values, and finding in it something even spiritual. I think in this late text, Heidegger is almost mystical. Now, let's comment on a few key passages in the text. First, he says, man is not the lord of beings. Man is the shepherd of being. Rejecting the way of Bacon and Descartes. Man is not the lord of beings, man is the shepherd of being. Understand what a shepherd is. In a sense, man is in charge. The human being is in charge. Oh, I think he says the human being, not man. But with Heidegger, I think man, the human being, and Dasein could all be used pretty nicely interchangeably. Dasein, man, the human being, is not the lord of beings. The human being is the shepherd of being. Now, this means we're avoiding one thing. We're avoiding the Baconian, Cartesian way of saying that man is the master and possessor of the beings of this world. But we're also avoiding the way of just reducing man to one cog in the great machine that is the world, or submission of man to being. No, man is, in a sense, the master, but not the lord and dominator, just the shepherd. Man is the shepherd of being. Man's business in the world that is shaped by us, the humanistic world, the world who's not using metaphysical terms, but something like them, the world whose essence is shaped by the human being. Our business in this world is to guide and lead and cultivate the world. The human being is the shepherd of being. Neither the master nor the slave, but the shepherd of being. And another passage in the text, language is the house of being. Well, this world is a world we know, and we know it through language. So this world is a world we shape, and we shape it in our life in it, in our knowing of it, in our experience with it, and all of that is a function of language. Language is the way the human being knows and experiences the world. So this world, because it has a human characteristic, and because language is the way we impart that human characteristic to the world, that human aspect, language is the house of being. Language is the way the human aspect of the world comes to light. And language is used to illuminate beings, to be the shepherd of being. Language is used by us to draw out of the beings of the world the beauty and the life, and in one word, the being of those beings. Language is how we draw it out of them. And here I think Heidegger is actually being extremely friendly to science. Despite his resistance, Scientism, I think he's probably best understood here as being strongly affirmative of the good work of science in drawing out the beauty of the world, but not, again, Scientism, because in these beings there is a beauty, there is a life, there is in these beings around me that you can see, the bamboo hedge back there, and all of these things, in all of these beings, the butterfly that floated past a while ago, there is a beauty and there is a life that our language can disclose and that our science can bring out, but that is not able to be reduced to what can be quantified and measured by science. And then there's finally this religious moment in Heidegger, I think, or something like it, where he refers, towards the end of the text, Letter on Humanism, he refers to this account in Aristotle of when some sightseers came to visit Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic metaphysician. And the sightseers were disappointed to see the great philosopher not doing anything great, but just sitting in his house, warming himself by the stove. And Heraclitus says to these sightseers, "For here too the gods are present." And Heidegger seems to really like this quote. Here too, in the ordinary, everyday reality, we find not only the value that is neglected by science, if we are scientismists, not scientists, but scientismists, and not only the value that is denied by those who say all value in this world is determined by the higher reality and the Platonic otherworldliness. Heidegger is following Nietzsche and rejecting these things as well. Here too, in the everyday reality, the gods are present. Here too we have those values, and we even have values that could be called spiritual. I think Heidegger is, in this passage, making room for something like religion, or at least mysticism. This world has a human quality. This world has a quality shaped by language, and our business as humans is to be the shepherds of this world. And this is a spiritual activity. Here too, the divine is present. Here in this world, the divine is present, says Martin Heidegger.